Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, Senior News Editor with Retail Insider. Joining me today is Costa Prodanovic, who is
Yep.
Senior Copywriter at Hootsuite. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we're going to talk about Hootsuite's 2023 Social Trends Report that just came out. And I'm going to go through a couple of the key insights from there. The first one I want to ask you about, Costa, is big brands are investing less in influencer marketing, opening the door for small businesses to engage in sort of top creators. Can you talk a little bit about that insight and what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's true. Big brands are investing less in influencers this year, especially when it comes to kind of mid-market and smaller influencers. And what we're seeing is that's really leaving the door open for smaller businesses, maybe businesses who haven't thought about investing in influencer or creator marketing before, to kind of hop in and give it a go. And I know that that probably comes with shall we say, maybe uncertainty of how to approach influencers or how much to be spending on influencers. And one of the nice things that we saw in our survey is that influencer marketing is a lot more approachable than many small business owners might think. We have a full breakdown in the report, and I encourage everybody to obviously read it, of how much people are spending on influencers. But typically what we're seeing is between kind of $100 to $500 per post. And we're seeing that when you're working with influencers and creators of that caliber, or finding people who strategically align to your business, they can help you solve some kind of critical challenges as a small business owner, especially as kind of we're seeing headcount reductions and challenges in creating content. But yeah, how was that for a bit of a run through?
Okay, that's super. Well, let me just ask you, talk about sort of the C-suite and, there's kind of new levels of scrutiny there, isn't there, in terms of everybody, everybody's in the C-suite always want to talk about the ROI, like what's my ROI on this, right? And can you talk about what the trend is in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we saw and we've been seeing over the last, I guess, 14 years since Hootsuite was founded as a business, and is this kind of the growth and like surgence of the social media manager is a role that's taken seriously within a business. And we really saw that come to a head kind of during the pandemic, as a lot of businesses were forced to or started investing in social media more because it was a channel that a lot of their consumers were using. We saw a lot of confidence grow in the return on investment of that social media. So actually, I'm going to pull up the actual stats. Our report found that confidence in social ROI was at an all-time high. This year, we had 96% of marketers report some level of confidence in their use of social media as a marketing tool. And that was up from, I think, 82% the year before that and 68% the year before that. So really, that was a big pandemic shift. But along with that kind of increased confidence in ROI, we're seeing more, we're seeing more spend get put into social media as a marketing tool. And one of the big assumptions we're making this year is that when you have more spend and more investment into a specific channel, especially as there's so much of a focus on it, we're likely to see a lot more scrutiny from the executive when it comes to the return on investment. So I guess over the span of the next year, we can expect a lot of the C-suite to start looking at the performance of social media marketing under a magnifying glass. And I think that's going to put a lot of social media marketers in a position to really show off their strengths if they can level with the C-suite and have better conversations with them about the value of social as a channel. I think that's the biggest opportunity there.
I guess too, Costa, in this day and age, obviously in the digital world that we live in, the metrics are there, and it's you can easily figure out like how many people are seeing this, how many people are engaging, etc. You can't necessarily do that when you put up an ad on a bus, on a bus bench, right? You don't really have those numbers to show. So people, I guess, in the C-suite are armed with data, right, and making decisions these days.
Absolutely. No, and that's not to actually, I think that's true. I think that there's a level of performance marketing that inherently comes with social media. One thing that I would be wary to warn marketers is getting over invested in performance metrics. I think that there's a lot of research to suggest that long-term brand building is massively important, and to get hyper focused on the kind of like immediate returns on click-through rates and things like that would be a disservice to doing some of that long-term brand building. So I think there's an opportunity to really talk with your C-suite and find balance between that kind of long-term brand building, big brand activation stuff, the buses, the posters. Don't discredit all that stuff. But when it comes to measuring some performance stuff, you can answer some of those questions using social.
You know, the other thing too to bear in mind is that sometimes a business, in terms of lead generation, all they need is one view, the right view, right? And that's all it takes. So you could have 100,000 views of something and nobody bites for say if you're a business, but you have one person, and that's all you need.
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
that's a super important note.
Let me just ask you another insight that came from the report was recycling content is a thing of the past. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have this trend about social innovators cracking the cross-posting code. So one of the things we saw in the interesting discrepancies in our research was that businesses that spent time focusing on creating content specific for each network were more confident in the performance of that content. So businesses that would kind of cross-post and repurpose and recycle content across different channels were least confident in the performance of their social marketing. And I think that what that's telling us is that there's a lot of value in focusing on what the channel that you're using, what your audience is actually doing with the channel that you're using. People use LinkedIn differently than they use Facebook, than they use TikTok, than they use Twitter.
Yeah.
These are all utilities that people use in different ways and are approaching them with kind of different mentalities as they're doing so. And I think it's really important for businesses to get smarter and more strategic about which channels they're using to communicate, and getting more focused on what kind of messages they're delivering on the specific channels. That's that. How's that for an answer?
Sure. Okay. So this one you're going to have to explain to me because I don't understand. So one of the key insights was identified as social commerce loses traction with platform pullback. What does that mean?
So social commerce, I'm pulling these up. I have a whole stack. Sorry, as I move the camera. I have my entire report printed out next to me, so I'm relying on my notes a little bit. There are 7 in the report. I can't keep all of them in my head.
Yeah.
So this one's really about trust. There was an Accenture survey that was done about 6 months ago that asked consumers kind of what they were having trouble with. Let me backtrack a little bit. Social commerce, I guess, over the last 2 years has been a really buzzy topic for a lot of people. And I think that the success of social commerce tools and direct purchase tools on social media in places like China have really led North American marketers to think that like this is the next big thing. One of the biggest things that we've seen over the last 2 years is that consumers in North America have been much more hesitant about adopting some of these purchase methods, I guess. And what that's actually led to, it's one of the variables among many, but we've seen the networks like Facebook, like TikTok and Twitter, actually not Twitter, TikTok and Facebook were largely, and Instagram, pull back on the social commerce functionality and scale their e-commerce plan, scale down their e-commerce plans. So the reason for a lot of that, according to that Accenture survey that I was mentioning before, is that there isn't a lot of consumer trust in things like handing their credit card information to the platforms, or trusting that the vendors on these channels are legitimate. And so I think you have this like inherent ingrained sense that like, well, if I walk into a business and I can see that it's brick and mortar, therefore I trust and therefore I make the purchase.
Yeah,
I think there's an opportunity for marketers to start doing some of those e-commerce fundamentals a little bit better in order to start building that trust back in social commerce, because I do think that there's a long-term horizon that we shouldn't miss. Social commerce may not boom right away. We may not have the same success as we have in places like that we've seen in places like China, but I think that there is a long-term growth horizon in North America that would be silly to disregard.
Yeah. So, one of the interesting things that I found, and the whole social aspect of and marketing has become such an integral part of so many businesses, small to large these days. But one of the insights from this report was that social search optimization is emerging as a make or break skill for marketers. Why?
Yeah, good question. So this is one of my personal, not that I feel like all these trends are my children and I'm not allowed to pick a favorite, but this is the one that gets the biggest college fund. If it's up to me. One of the really interesting things that our research saw was that younger internet users, especially people between the ages of 16 and 25, were more likely, for the first year ever, were more likely to be using social media to search and do things like brand research and make purchase decisions than search platforms like Google. And that's a massive shift. I think for a long time, many of us have thought of Google as inevitable and a kind of this inherent utility that's going to be baked into our lives forever. And I mean, that's not to say that Google's going anywhere anytime fast. I would be very hesitant to say, let's look at the shiny new thing and just pull all our investment and focus away from Google.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be wary of that. But if younger people are using social media to make search decisions, or to do search and to make purchase decisions more and more, I think it would be prudent for marketers to start focusing more and investing on in considering things like how do we end up on the top of the For You page? How do we make our content more visible? How do we make it more accessible? And so I think those are going to be key skills for marketers heading into 2023, especially as we see this shift, this kind of generation shift slowly crest.
As an aside, as a joke, I remember years ago when I worked at the Calgary Herald, and newspapers, you're always slow to adapt to the digital world, but we always joked around it within the newsroom about that every story that we wrote about, no matter what it was, we should tag Britney Spears and Kadar, etc. Right?
It's one of those generational shifts that I mean, I think that those, what am I trying to say? I think that the shift to social media is less of like an acute revolution than a lot of people could talk of, like than the way that we frame it oftentimes. I feel like it's an inherent utility that's just replaced the same mechanisms that we've used for a long time. Twitter is becoming a media platform. Facebook is becoming arguably a post, like I don't know, Canada Post, for instance, so a place to communicate with friends and send messages.
Yeah.
TikTok's becoming an entertainment channel, similar to the way that TV was similar to the function that TV achieved for us in the past. So anyways, that's a side tangent that I could go on for a very, very long time. But
the last question I have for you, Costa, is okay, in the retail world, we obviously have gone through a challenging and ever evolving landscape these days because of the pandemic, and it brought so many people into the world of e-commerce, etc. Now we're seeing the return to the bricks and mortar. All right, and more people are coming back to the stores. More people are wandering around the shopping malls of the country. Is there a danger for the retail sector here to lose its focus on the digital side because of the return to the physical?
Definitely. So that was another really interesting piece of information. The insight that we found in the report was that while people were heading back to brick and mortar experiences, people were back on shopping in person, their expectations for things like customer service on online channels hasn't changed. So there's a risk for businesses who are disinvesting from their e-commerce and online offerings and losing focus on digital customer service purely to send people back into the in-store experience. Because if your customers are expecting a response and expecting you to be present on those platforms, that could have, that inherently has an impact on your brand and the way that people experience it, regardless of the fact that you do have that in-store, I guess, face-to-face contact. So I would say don't lose focus on it. I mean, I know that it's really hard for a lot of businesses who, after a pandemic and shifting to e-commerce and now finding themselves shifting back to in-person shopping, and they're asking themselves and then gets faced with the looming recession and all of the struggles that come with that, are asking themselves, how do we actually effectively manage these digital channels if I can't actually increase the scope of investment that I have? If I can't spend more money on, both these things, so what do I do? I think my biggest kind of recommendation there would be to start looking at simple automation tools like AI chatbots that you can, for instance, plug into your social messaging stores. Shameless plug, Heyday by Hootsuite is a fantastic chatbot for exactly that purpose. But yeah, there are kind of cost-effective ways that you can manage that influx of customer service requests without sacrificing your in-store experience or your e-commerce experience. That's my biggest takeaway.
All right, super. Well, thanks, Costa, for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, that was Costa Prodanovic, who is senior copywriter with Hootsuite. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, senior news editor with Retail Insider. Thanks for joining us today.